All right, let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about a new dynasty, which is called a Ming Dynasty from 1368 to 1644, the Ming Dynasty. And we're also going to be talking about the early modern era of China. Last time we talked about the Mongol dynasty, which is called the Yuan dynasty, with the capital in Beijing. The Mongols ruled China for almost 100 years until they got kicked out by Han Chinese around 1368. The Yuan government made a lot of many mistakes towards the end of their dynasty for their rule to be ended. For example, they mobilized a lot of labor to construct the dikes along the Yellow River. You know, the Yellow River always floods, right? There's always a major flood once about 100 years. So any central government that controls the central plain must mobilize a lot of laborers to work on the river, to build dikes, to construct irrigation projects, stuff like that. The Yuan mobilized a lot of Chinese laborers to work on the river, but it also caused a lot of dissatisfaction with the government. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the natural disasters that really beset China during the time period. So this has to do with some climate changes. So drought, floods altogether caused famine, and this also caused famine will also cause bandits. And then when bandits grow, they become major rebellions that could overturn local governments and even threaten the central government. So all these things are working together. The other thing I want to mention about how a Chinese dynasty ends is physical stress. Yeah. So any government is just like any economic entity. It's faced with financial planning, financial expenditures. All these things are crucial to any government, right? So traditional Chinese imperial governments are not an exception. As we mentioned before, one financial pattern that we can identify of traditional Chinese dynasties is that the expenditures always grow exponentially as time goes. So if you look at the size of governments for every dynasty or empire at its beginning stage, it's normally pretty small. Normally very efficient. The relationship between the ruler and his ministers are pretty intimate, pretty close. They work together pretty well. But as time goes, as more affairs coming up, like national defense affairs, right? Yellow River, natural disaster affairs, education, construction, fiscal affairs, when all these affairs come up, imperial government tends to build up more offices to solve those problems. And they tend to hire more scholar officials to solve those problems. But then the problem is, the more problem you try to solve, the more problems are coming. In the end, it's just like, we call this bureaucratic expansion, right? So as time goes, in the end, while new offices, new positions are created, those offices and positions will persist or last forever. Because people always, as a ruler or boss, you always love to hire people. It's always difficult to fire people because that affects your employees' benefits, right? So as time goes, the size of governments will continue to grow to the degree that it become a huge physical burden for the empire, right? Almost all Chinese dynasties repeat this kind of financial pattern. For example, the Ming Dynasty we're going to talk about, at its beginning decades, it's during the first decades of its time, the size of government is only hundreds of scholar officials, hundreds of officials, good enough, sufficient to run the whole empire. But about 300 years later, towards the end of the empire, you got more than 100,000 officials. But the problem is your revenue remains the same. Okay, so when you have a larger expanding government, but your revenue also grows at the same time, but not at the same speed as government growth, then you got a problem. Okay, so the problem is the pay to each official is getting less and less. So when you have, we're going to talk about this in details, but one problem with China's early modern era is that with the population, the population of China is growing rapidly during the 16th to 17th century. But the size of government, although it's growing, but the local government size is not growing in proportion to Chinese population, and the result is the government become less and less efficient. So the society got into a lot of problems. So this is the major problem. Okay, back to the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan dynasty actually made a lot of mistakes. For example, they learned how to issue paper bill from the Song dynasty. And the mistake they made is that they created inflation. They issued too much paper bills without enough reserve in their central bank. So people realized that the paper bill they issue is just garbage. So no one is using it. People go to a precious metal as the major currency privately. So the government's credibility or the government credit is collapsing, right? So so all these factors coming together are causing a lot of rebellions. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Warren rebels. So this guy's called Zhu Yuanzhang. Zhu Yuanzhang, the founder of the new dynasty, Ming Dynasty, is born into a very, very poor family. I think among all the Chinese emperors, this guy is probably from the poorest family, absolutely the poorest family. His Zhu Yuanzhang's father and grandfather, they did not even have a name. They're called by like the ranking in the family. His father is called like his grandfather was called like a Zhu 54. Yeah, it's not even a real name. Yeah, Zhu 54. Yeah, it just means his number 54 in the whole clan or whole extended family. And Zhu Yuanzhang, when he was young, his siblings some of his siblings even starved to death because of the famine. He was born in southern Central Plain. Today is sort of a northern Anhui province. Yeah, so he growing up in poverty. His family was so poor that his parents couldn't afford the financial burden of raising him up. He was sent to a Buddhist monastery. Okay, so he served as a Buddhist monk for a certain time period. So this guy have seen all the terrible conditions of the lowest strata of the Chinese society. Yeah, he has seen that. But all this terrible experience of poverty, violence, and harsh life did not make him a very kind person. Okay, he's not a very kind person. I mean, growing out of that kind of poverty and violence give him this mentality that he has to be strong. Okay, he's growing up with the belief that he has to be very, very strong-willed, very, very harsh, sometimes very, very cruel, ready to kill anyone in his way. So when he's growing up, when he's rising up as a rebel leader, he joined several of the rebellion groups and eventually became a successful military commander. And his army eventually defeated the Mongol army. The Mongols, although they were really good at fighting during the 13th century, But after 100 years, when they enjoyed all the political privileges in China, they sort of degenerated. They are not anymore. They are no longer good fighters anymore, right? All the Mongols, they're ruling class everywhere in China. Okay, they scattered all around China, in Yunnan province, many other provinces, and everywhere they go, they're rulers. They have a lots of. Last time we talked about this social caste system that was in place under the Yuan dynasty. So the Mongols really did not have to work, did not have to serve military, did not have to do a lot of military services. So after 100 years, they forgot how to ride a horse or how to use bows and arrows. So they lost the kind of military spirit that their ancestors had. So yeah, so in 14th century, they were defeated by these Chinese rebels like Zhu Yuanzhang. So in 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang and his army, he sent his army to defeat most of his rival rebel competitors. And then he also sent army to attack Beijing, the Yuan dynasty capital. Actually, Beijing became the capital since the Yuan dynasty. And Beijing has been China's capital through the following two dynasties, including Ming and Qing, except for a certain short time period when the capital was in Nanjing, the southern capital. All right, so these are the portraits of our founding emperor. Okay, as you can see, he probably suffered some smallpox, right? Look at all these dots on his face. So he was infected with the smallpox. So he's not let's say he's not the best looking man, okay, in the world. But he loves he loves to hire painters to make portraits for him. Yeah. Legend has it that he's so cruel that if a painter would faithfully, accurately depict his look or his face, yeah, the painter will be slaughtered. So he's just cruel like that. Until he finally got a satisfactory portrait like this, where he is depicted as a kind and nice and a wise old man. Okay, although he is actually pretty ugly. That's what the historical sources report. Yeah, he has a really sticking chin, as you can see from those portraits. Yeah, but he's the emperor. Okay, he's the emperor. When he's in power, he launched several purges. We're going to talk about this. Purges means a political movement. A ruler tried to sort of kick out his people he did not like in the offices. Okay, we call this purges, right? For example, Joseph Stalin launched many purges, right? Chairman Mao also launched many purges during the Cultural Revolution period from 1966 to 1976, right? Zhu Yuanzhang did the same thing, right? He did not want to share power with his friends who followed him in the Civil War that got him the throne. So he launched at least 3 or 4 major purges. Each time he killed 20 to 30,000 people in his government. So this guy is not afraid to kill a lot of people. So if you look at the Chinese politics, truly cruelty, violence, brutality, those are the words to describe that kind of a palace politics. Okay, yeah, it's pretty high risk, pretty dangerous. Yeah, pretty dangerous. But by killing so many people, he consolidated his rule. Okay, he consolidated his rule. Later historians compared Zhu Yuanzhang with Mao Zedong because both of them share a lot of in common. They share a lot in common. They're from sort of from countryside. They don't have any nobility background. They rose to power through the successful use of military power, right? They're rebels that overturned the previous government. And then after they're in power, they use iron-fisted policies to consolidate their rule. They're not afraid they don't shy away from killing a lot of their colleagues. Yeah, sometimes hundreds, thousands of them. Okay, so but by doing that, they sort of consolidated their rule pretty successfully. And both Zhu Yuanzhang and Mao also had this sort of a populist tendency. This is my point of view. That means although they were really harsh on government officials, but they sort of try to sort of rely their rule on Chinese peasants. They have this confidence in Chinese rural society. They believe that a rural society of Chinese peasants should be the mainstay of their rule or their revolution. I mean, in Mao's case, that's revolution. We're going to talk about this later. So Mao, although he claims that he's a Marxist, right? He's a communist, but truly Mao's rule is deeply rooted in Chinese tradition. Mao is very, very familiar with the Chinese legalist tradition that we talked about several lectures back. Mao even admires some of the policies and actions previous emperors have done, like Zhu Yuanzhang. So to understand today's China, we really need to look at China's history, okay, to have a deeper understanding of that, okay? So the Mongols got kicked out. The funny thing is that, let me show you a map, maybe. The Mongols, the Mongol Yuan dynasty in Beijing, okay, it's outside of this map. The Mongol Yuan dynasty in Beijing, over here, in 1368, when Zhu Yuanzhang's army was about to attack the city, Beijing, the last Yuan emperor gave up. He did not even fight. They just opened up the northern gate of the city, and they fled to Mongolia. They fled to Mongolia. But it doesn't mean that all Mongols are gone, because for the 100 years when Mongols were in China, they intermarried with a lot of Chinese. So this is why almost all Chinese perhaps have some Mongol blood. Yeah. So the Ming Dynasty sort of unified China, restored Han Chinese rule in 1368. Okay. But the Mongols remain in Mongolia because the Chinese is always very difficult for the Han Chinese to destroy all the Mongols outside of the Great Wall. So all the Ming Dynasty, everything that the Ming government can do is to continue to build the Great Wall of China. Okay, so whenever the central government is not established by nomadic people, if it's established by Han Chinese like a Ming Dynasty, then you're gonna have to build the Great Wall of China to defend the agricultural part of China against the nomadic people. So the Mongols are always there, and they constantly pose a threat to the Ming Dynasty. Okay, so next we're gonna move on to another emperor, Zhu Di. Zhu Di is Zhu Yuanzhang's son, but he was not the throne prince. But he was very able. He certainly has a military genius. He was appointed by his father to serve in Beijing city, in the Beijing city. So he is the military commander in the garrison, in the Ming garrison in Beijing, to defend the empire against the Mongols. But he did not get along with his nephew, who inherited the throne. So eventually he launched a rebellion, and he defeated his nephew's army, and he took Nanjing, the southern capital, which is the city where I was born. And then after that, his nephew sort of got missing. He's gone missing in the last battle, and the imperial palace in the southern capital got burned down. So no one knows where the previous emperor went. So Zhu Di became the emperor, but he did not get the throne through a sort of a justifiable, legitimate approach. So he desperately wanted to have the recognition of his legitimacy by everyone under heaven, not just people in China under his rule, but also foreigners, say people in Southeast Asia, people in Indonesia, in Philippines, right? People even in India and Africa. He wanted everyone in the world to recognize his power and his legitimacy. You know, when you're really missing something, you normally desperately want it, right? So that's the mentality of our Emperor Zhu. So for that reason, Zhu launched 7 voyages. He built up a huge fleet to visit all these different areas, regions of the world, to sort of proclaim his power, to show off his wealth, and to declare his legitimacy. So that's what he wanted to do. So we're going to talk about the emperor's 7 voyages to the world. Okay, the admiral the emperor appointed is someone called Zheng He. Okay, his name is here. Yeah, Zheng He. Zheng He, his ancestors were not Han Chinese. Zheng He's ancestors were from Central Asia. He probably has a lot of Arabian blood. His father and grandfather visited Mecca, is showing that they're both Muslims. So Zheng He is a Muslim. Okay, is a Muslim, but he, as a Central Asian family, Zheng He's family migrated to China during the Yuan dynasty, and they served the Yuan government in southern China, in Yunnan province. Yunnan province of China is close to Burma, in the south. So when Zhu Yuanzhang's army attacked Yunnan province, Zheng He, a young boy, was arrested. Zhu Yuanzhang followed the Mongols' tradition. You know, he treated the POWs, prisoners of war, very brutally. So as a young boy, Zheng He was castrated against his will. So he's taken as a slave. And then young Zheng He was given to Zhu Di, one of the princes, right? Zhu Di, the prince, he was given the young Zheng He as a slave. So he took Zheng He to Beijing, and they sort of grew up together, and they built up a very strong friendship. Zhu Di really trusted this eunuch. Zheng He is a eunuch. So when Zhu Di became emperor, he gave the job of organizing the 7 voyages to the eunuch he trusted. That is Zheng He. So this is how the eunuch became the admiral, that leads the 7 voyages to visit the so-called Western Oceans. Chinese call it the Xiyang, Western Oceans. So the first voyage, the first several voyages set out from the southern capital from Nanjing, and they're gonna sail all the way through China's east coast to South China Sea. Okay, here, South China Sea. And then they would visit Vietnam. At that time, there are different kingdoms in Vietnam. Zheng He dealt with the local rulers in Southeast Asia. And then they would also visit different tribal entities, tribal leaders in Indonesia. Okay, they would also visit today's Malaya, Cambodia, right? And then they would sail south to today's Singapore. There's a strait there called Malacca Strait, and they would cross the Malacca Strait. This would allow them to enter the Indian Ocean. And then they would cross the Indian Ocean and visit today's Sri Lanka, which is called Ceylon in history. And then from there, they would visit these different Indian cities. At that time, there are many different kingdoms in India. So it depends on depending on who you deal with, you're gonna have to trade. You're gonna trade with them, right? And Zheng He's sub-fleets also visited the Persian Gulf in the Middle East. Yeah, as you can see, they crossed this ocean, and they visit all these cities in the Arabian Peninsula, and there's some of the sub fleets even visited the Red Sea. They sailed all the way into Red Sea. The Chinese Yeah, went that far. And some of them even visited East Africa, including Kenya, Somalia, right? All these cities, all these regions. Okay, so the purpose of these voyages is to show off the emperor's power, wealth, and sort of a hospitality, right? Because all these local kings and leaders, they're invited to visit China. So if you wanna say, look at the Chinese capital, Zheng He would be very welcome. And he say, hey, just jump in my ship. I will bring you to China. And they would bring all these local tribal leaders or kings from Philippines, from Indonesia, from Southeast Asia, and the emperor would welcome them in their capital. And some of the local tribal leaders and kings even stayed in China for more than 10 years, and they died there. Because they enjoy the Chinese civilization over there. Zheng He's fleet is also very impressive. There are conflicting information about how large his fleet is, but historians generally agree that for every voyage, there are hundreds of ships. The largest ships are called treasure ships, called 宝船 in Chinese. They're huge. They're probably the largest wooden boats or ships ever built by any human beings. You know, historical reports range from about the size. They range from I don't know 100 feet long to maybe 300 feet long. 300 feet long maybe a little too much. It's probably an imagination, but certainly those treasure ships are the largest ever any human can build with wood. So they're moving cities. They're moving cities, and in addition to the biggest treasure ships, there are another hundreds of smaller ships, like horse ships, water tank ships, repair ships, and battleships. Each battleship would be equipped with dozens of bronze cannon guns, so the biggest navy as well. So when everyone witnessed the movements of such a huge fleet, it's awe-inspiring. It's absolutely awe-inspiring, and that's exactly what the emperor wanted people to think of. That's exactly the mental reaction the emperor wants. He wants to impress all these China's neighbors, right? So these moving cities, consisting of each voyage would consist of more than 20,000 soldiers and the seamen and the crew members. They each are in charge of different things, and they also bring repair material with them. So that means if any ship got broken, they can fix it immediately and continue to sail. And the Chinese also have very abundant knowledge about sailing. For example, they would plant veggies, fruits on those huge ships. They even have water ponds to raise freshwater fish so that they have fish to eat. Yes. So veggies and fresh veggies and fruits are super important for this long distance sailing, because when Europeans embarked on journeys to explore different parts of the world through maritime routes, a lot of them suffer from the problem of lack of vitamin, and that's deadly. A lot of Europeans died during 80 or 100 years later for lack of vitamin, but Chinese never had that problem because their ships are moving cities where they can grow veggies and fruits and provide a vitamin to their crew members. So that's not a problem. So we can do a comparison of Zheng He's voyages and say Christopher Columbus. Columbus is Santa Maria. Okay, so if you look at this comparison, there's a tiny small ship is Columbus. Columbus is Santa Maria. Yeah, 75 feet by 25 feet, a small boat. And in the background is Zheng He's treasure boat. That's how large that boat is. Okay, the Chinese really built up the largest navy, and Zheng He is 80 years before 80 years before da Gama, the Portuguese sailor who arrived in India. When Zheng He arrived in India, the Chinese were reported by the local people as so-called the white man. So this shows something interesting. The racial concepts that we have today is a modern invention. Ancient people, when they look at other people's skin, they don't have our modern understanding, European categorization of a racial categories. So Chinese could be considered as white man by local Indians, because most in southern India, we know that the most local population, they have darker skin. So when they see Chinese, they think that these people are white men. But Zheng He was there 80 years earlier than Europeans who arrived in India. But the Chinese are very different from the Europeans. We know that we're talking about an era of colonization, right? Yeah, the great era of exploration when Europeans wanted to find the colonies. Europeans visited all these different regions of the world to establish colonies, okay? They want to find supplier of the raw material, and they want to find the markets for their European products, right? This is what we call colonialism, but the Chinese are different. Zheng He, I mean, they might be, the Chinese may be motivated by a pompous motivation. The emperor just want to show his power, but the Chinese had no intention to establish any colonies, no matter where they go. Although they had the power, they had the military power. I mean, look at how large the Navy is. They had the power to establish colonies in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, India, and even East Africa, but they didn't. They just basically they came over to say hello and to show you how wealthy and powerful we are, and they traded with the local people, and they bring the local exotic products back to their capital. That's it. They never established any colonies. They did not even build up any military bases along the way, although they could. So keep in mind that these Chinese voyages are very, very different from the European voyages. Okay. So when Zheng He visited Africa, they brought over all these exotic animals like rhino, hippo, lions, right, the cheetah. And one day Zheng He reported to the emperor. He said, "Hey, Emperor, Your Majesty, we found the legendary beast mentioned in the Analects of Confucius. In the Analects Confucius, there's one passage that says Confucius dreamed of a unicorn, and when he wakes up, Confucius says, 'I'm going to die because I dreams of this legendary beast that's a unicorn.' But no one sees." No Chinese have ever seen a unicorn, right? It's a legendary beast. But Zheng He reports that we caught a unicorn in Africa, and the emperor, Your Majesty, we're gonna bring at least 2 of them back to you. The emperor is super happy, and the emperor built up a royal zoo to accommodate all these exotic animals Zheng He brought over. And sure enough, here's the unicorn. This is the unicorn that Zheng He brought to the emperor. In order to welcome the unicorn into the royal zoo, the emperor had to demolish and enlarge the city gate because these unicorns are too tall. they even had to enlarge the city gate for the unicorns to come in. So that's so the emperor is super happy with all these contributions to his personal collection of exotic plants and animals. The Chinese also accumulated a lot of knowledge about the world through these voyages. So what's shown in the PowerPoint is a nautical chart, is the sea map that the Zheng He sort of made. The Chinese has their own technologies to measure the distance, to measure the depth of the sea, to measure directions, and to chart the territories, the oceans they explored. So all this knowledge is contained in all these nautical charts. But unfortunately, after Emperor Zhu died, these voyages were ended, because Confucian scholars believe that these voyages, although they may be fun, the emperor is having a lot of fun with those voyages, but they're too expensive. They're way too expensive. Think about that. I mean, for any country to send it, to organize 7 voyages containing hundreds of huge ships with 20,000 crew members, that's going to cost you a lot of money. So eventually, Confucian scholars are criticized. They criticized these voyages. Confucian scholars saying, we can use the money in better ways, right? You can perhaps, to compensate the farmers who suffer famine, right? Or maybe even to build up more schools, right? We can do lots of things with that money. You don't have to, just waste that money into those useless voyages. So in the end, these voyages were all ended, and some Confucian scholar officials, they're afraid that future emperors would reorganize this kind of voyages, so they burned down the nautical charts like this. The ocean maps made by Zheng He, most of them were destroyed. What you see on the screen is only a tiny small portion of Zheng He's nautical charts that are left. Yeah, so in the imperial court, you will see different discourses, different opinions competing with each other, right? So I want to talk a little bit about these peaceful voyages. So these voyages are mainly very peaceful, except for like 2 of these voyages in which Zheng He destroyed some pirates then in Indonesia. Yeah, in Indonesia, there was a major Chinese pirates whose army, navy were destroyed by Zheng He. That's one battle that Zheng He engaged in, and the only other battle is in Sri Lanka or Ceylon. Chinese sources reported that when Zheng He arrived at Ceylon, they tried to establish some kind of diplomatic relations with the Ceylon king, but the king felt threatened, because when you see hundreds of ships coming to your harbor, to your city, with the 20,000 well-trained, well-equipped soldiers, you feel threatened, right? So the Chinese sources report that the Ceylon king invited Zheng He to a banquet, but in the banquet, they actually wanted to kill Zheng He, but Zheng He realizes this. Okay, so Zheng He secretly sends an army to attack the Ceylon army. At the same time, when he goes to the banquet, the Chinese military force easily defeated the local Ceylon army, and then so the Chinese controlled the country, or at least the capital. And what Zheng He did is that they arrested the Ceylon king who tried to kill him, and they brought the Ceylon king all the way back to China as a prisoner, okay, to Nanjing, the southern capital. And Zhu Di, the emperor, interrogated the Ceylon king. The emperor asked the Ceylon king, why would you do this to me? Something like that. And the Ceylon king was under arrest in China for many years. And then the Chinese also established a pro-Chinese government in Ceylon, who is the previous king's younger brother. Okay, so this kind of a world of policing activities, I call them world policing activities, are very similar to what United States are doing today. When it's, United States is sort of motivated by this belief in legitimacy based on democracy. United States sometimes will go to militarily intervene in other countries' politics, right? Overturn the government, and then establish the pro-American government. The Chinese did the same thing. Okay, in Ceylon. So this is very controversial. Okay, very controversial. But for this time period, China served as the world police. So Zheng He's voyages also served the job of policing all these neighboring countries. For example, for those Southeast Asian countries like Burma or Thailand, if one country wants to pay a tribute to China's capital, but if the envoy is thwarted or stopped by his neighbor country, then you could file a complaint with Beijing or Nanjing. I mean, in this case, I mean, Zhu Di first had his capital in Nanjing, and then he relocated the capital to Beijing. So if the Chinese emperor received that complaint, he would send a letter to the other party in the dispute saying, hey, you're sort of violating this international law that China recognizes. Okay, yeah, because you cannot stop your neighbor from paying a tribute to Beijing, right? Or if a Southeast Asian country had a coup d'etat, that means had a sort of a inner struggle. For example, if a minister overturned the previous king's rule and usurped the throne, in that case, the Chinese emperor would also intervene. So the Chinese concept of a proper international order certainly is not based on democracy. There is no such thing, but it's based on conservative traditional legitimacy, right? For example, if the Thai king has been ruling for like centuries, but all of a sudden a evil minister is going to usurp the throne, then the Chinese emperor would intervene by sending a letter. If there's no response, then he would send the navy. He would send navy to Southeast Asia. Okay, because in the eyes of the Chinese emperor, there's only one son of heaven. Okay, all the other local leaders are just local kings. They're protectorates. Yeah, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, or all these different tribes in Philippines, they're just protectorates. Okay, they're required to sort of pay tribute to Chinese capital, and the emperor also is required to provide military assistance to these local regimes. So it's a mutual sort of obligation. It's a mutual obligation. Another example of this tribute system is that we're going to talk about this a little bit later. In late 16th century, in the 1590s, China was still under the Ming Dynasty rule. The Japanese invaded Korea. There's a Japanese military leader, Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi invaded Chosun Dynasty in Korea. Yeah, Korea was ruled by this dynasty called Chosun Dynasty. The Chosun king was sort of consider himself as sort of a protectorate of Beijing. So he sent the Korean king always paid tribute to Beijing periodically, very diligently. So as a return, he wanted military assistance from Beijing when Korea was under attack by Japan. So the Ming emperor sent a large army to Korea to help with the Chosun king, and the Chinese fought with the Japanese for many years in Korea. Until Hideyoshi died and the Japanese had to retreat. So that's the story. So in other words, the emperor is obligated sort of to provide some kind of military help to his protectorates. Okay, back to Zheng He's voyages. There are different interpretations of these voyages. One opinion is that these voyages are pretty good, right? Because, I mean, this is modern scholars' opinion. We call it the first opinion. First opinion is that these voyages are good because Chinese are not seeking to establish any colonies. They are basically peaceful and friendly. They traded with the local people. They sign up a sort of a did not sign treaties, but they establish a lot of stone steles or stone inscriptions everywhere they go, to sort of strengthen the friendship and diplomacy with the local governments, right? it's a good thing. It's a good thing. But the second opinion is that is a Confucian opinion. That means these voyages are totally a waste of resources. Third opinion is that also a modern opinion. That is, China missed the opportunity. China missed opportunity to build up a colonial empire like the European state. Okay, yeah, this opinion was held by modern Chinese scholars, especially in early 20th century. Yeah, so this opinion is that China could have, just like Europeans who arrived in India and Africa 80 years later, China could have built up a lot of colonies in those countries so that they could use the market and the raw material in those colonies to sort of help with a industrial revolution in China per se, in China, the homeland, right? We know that, industrial revolution could not have happened in Western Europe in the late 18th century and early 19th century without colonies, right? Because when you have industrial revolution, you're going to build a lot of textiles, right? Machines, right? A lot of products, industrial products without a market. Who are you going to sell it to, right? You're going to have to sell your products to the vast market in your colonies. This is how Britain rose in history, successful in industrial revolution, right? Colonies are very important. But look at China. China did not have industrial revolution, right? In early modern period, China has been taking the lead as a leading civilization, but in this time period we're talking about, China is falling behind, right? So this is a third opinion is saying Zheng He's voyages could have built up all these colonies and boosting China's own industrial revolution, but it didn't. It's a missed opportunity. So I wanna hear what you think about this. So among these three opinions, which one do you think makes sense, and why? Anyone?
Honestly, I think all three of them make sense within the context. Like I don't think there's an issue necessarily with any of them, because I know at that time, like, imperialism and colonialism was like a really big thing that people were trying to spread, and it was like rapidly happening, even like within 80 years. It's not a very long time frame to have like to colonize the entire world. So it makes sense that a lot of people would have seen it as a missed opportunity. But at the same time, I think it is a good thing that they were kind of just looking around and not necessarily trying to mess with any countries. Mm-hmm. So I think all three of them have really solid grounds for a good argument.
Interesting. So they are all right, huh?
Yeah, I would say, because all of them fit within the context of where the empire was going and everything.
Good, very good. Any other comments? Do you guys agree with the Jay Lee?
Yeah, I would say I agree as well, but I think that what's kind of hard about this is that a lot of this can be influenced by hindsight. Like, obviously, we as people living centuries after the fact can think about how China missed an opportunity to establish a colonial empire or consider the merits of this naval fleet, but obviously the people at this time couldn't predict any of those things. I mean, when you look at as we read, I mean, for our readings, the Ming Dynasty like very quickly went through some financial problems later in its reign, which did not help things. And we can't be certain whether this naval fleet would have been a bigger detriment had they continued it, like whether that would have just ended up using up even more money and facilitated the collapse faster, or if China did try to use it to establish colonial empires, if it could have prolonged the lifespan of the Ming Dynasty by giving it access to more resources, like what happened with all of these European empires.
Right.
I mean, I think I think China, even if they had the opportunity to establish a colonial empire, I think China was at this point generally just more content with having countries pay tribute,
Right.
like because of the belief that, you know, the emperor was like this kind of moral center of this region and that
Right.
it was only respectful to pay tribute to him. I don't think they were really expecting much more from these countries than that. But again, that's something with like the benefit of hindsight. We can say, oh, they missed out because we know that the European countries were doing that, but China didn't necessarily know that these European empires were going to become so powerful. So they might have not thought it was necessary and just thought, hey, this is wasting money. We're already going through some financial difficulties. So I think they're all, I would agree that they're all understandable, but it's also a matter of like, I imagine it was very difficult deciding what exactly to do for the people in that time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Those are good points. Yeah. Any other comments? Yeah, these are great discussion.
I think it's also important to understand that a nation's responsibility is first and foremost to its own territories and to its own people. So if you are having problems domestically, it's generally unwise to invest so much in international colonization or trade.
Maria, do you agree with the Confucian scholars who criticize these expensive voyages more?
I would, because there is still like a struggling class. There's still like a lot of poverty, a lack of education.
Exactly.
Like, I think all of that money could have definitely gone into the institutions within that country instead of trying to create more institutions outside of the country.
Good. Yeah, good point. Good point. Any other comments?
Actually, I just thought of another thing as well.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Which is that I think part of the problem with the idea of China establishing a colonial empire in this period is because China is already such a massively populated country at this time. And in order to run an effective colonial empire, you need to be able to expend military resources to keep those first to establish the colonies in the first place and then to keep them in line.
Yeah.
And the problem is that China is already so large, both in terms of geographic area and in population, that I'm sure that it could only cause more instability to take soldiers that could be needed domestically and sending them abroad to oversee colonies, because countries like, you know, Britain or France, I mean, they're not necessarily small countries, but compared to China, they're certainly not big. So they could afford to send those soldiers off. I think China would have been a much more risky maneuver because we already know about the problems with banditry that were occurring. I think that kind of building off,
and
of
also the Mongols, right?
Yeah, like there were still all these like peoples that would raid in Chinese territory. So I mean, kind of building off of what Maria was saying, I think that China, it probably could have suffered from domestic problems if it tried to expend those military resources on establishing colonies.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. By the way, as a footnote to what Ryan just said, China never built such a navy, such a large navy after Zheng He's voyages until modern time. Yeah. You know, after Zhu died, Emperor Zhu died, the Confucian scholars not only burned down the nautical charts, they also just let those treasure ships to get rotten in the shipyards. Yeah, because they don't want any future emperors to organize such expensive voyages anymore. So no navy. China is turning sort of inwards. Yeah, military expansion happened overland, not overseas anymore. Yeah. If you look at the Qing dynasty, which is the last dynasty of China, which we're going to talk about next time, the Qing expanded militarily towards Central Asia, towards Mongolia, towards Tibet, but not towards the sea anymore. So China has been be building a land empire. So not a very strong interest in the ocean anymore. So this is an exception. So Zheng He's voyages serve more like an exception rather than the rule. But these voyages were sort of reinterpreted in many different ways by later historians, right? We know that during the Ming, scholar officials thought this is wasteful. This is such a waste of resources. And then in modern time, when China was bullied by European powers, right? Many Chinese scholars realized that maybe we missed a chance. So in other words, any one historical event would always be reinterpreted in many different ways in history, depending on your contemporary agenda. So as you guys rightly pointed out, so all these conclusions or interpretations, they make sense in their own context. Yeah, because a historian's job is to understand before we judge. But you will continue to see this, right? So in the early 20th century, when China is bullied, defeated by European powers, the missed opportunity interpretation came up, okay? And then in 21st century, when China achieved such economic accomplishments, right, by economic reform, by market economy, Xi Jinping's government, I mean, President Xi Jinping is president of China today. President Xi Jinping is making a lot of initiatives that reinterprets Zheng He's voyages as historical precedents to justify today's contemporary China's economic expansion or business activities in all these countries. This is called the One Belt, One Road initiative. Yeah, if you do a Google search, you will know that China, over the past 10 years, China has been engaging in this so-called One Belt, One Road, One Road, One Belt initiative. That means China established a investment bank to loan a lot of money to China's neighbors, including all these Southeast Asian countries, right? In Southeast Asian countries, Sri Lanka received a lot of loans from China, and also basically they follow the routes, the maritime routes of Zheng He. For all these countries, China is the Asian Developments and Investment Bank, headquartered in Beijing, is giving loans to all these countries, and also including all these China's land Eurasian neighbors like Kazakhstan, even Russia and Ukraine, to extend China's economic influences. So for that reason, Zheng He's voyages are cited by Chinese government as a good precedent of a peaceful diplomacy and friendly relationships with all these countries. For example, in 2008, when the Olympic Games were held in Beijing, Zheng He's voyages were depicted as an opera in the Olympic Stadium to show that Chinese are friendly. You know, we don't want to have colonial expansion or colonial control of your country. We just come over to say hello. So the same historical events are constantly being reinterpreted by different enactors of history for their own particular political economic agendas. And this will continue to happen. You will see, a lot of times you will see totally composing interpretations of any single historical event, right? You will find out numerous historical events are like that in history. So the last thing I want to mention is one interesting argument that is a retired British naval officer authored a book called 14, I don't know, I don't remember the exact title. It's probably called 1430 something. Chinese discovered America. It's authored by a amateur historian called Mr. Menzies, if my memory serves me right. So this retired naval military officer claims that Zheng He's fleet discovered America before Columbus. Yeah, and his evidence is one very vague report from Zheng He's travelogue, and not Zheng He's his personal travelogue, but his officer's travelogue that mentions a lost sub-fleet was drifting in the Pacific Ocean for like more than 40 days, and then eventually they landed in an unknown land. So Mr. Menzies believed that Zheng He actually discovered America, and he also discovered so-called another piece of evidence that is a Zheng He's that's allegedly a ocean map of the world made by Zheng He. If you look at this map, it's amazingly accurate. It not only contains America, North America, South America, right, China, Africa, so Eurasia, and it even has Antarctica. So so this map was purchased by Mr. Menzies in a Chinese antiques market, and he used this so-called evidence to show that Zheng He discovered America. A lot of historians, professional historians, all disagree. In my understanding, all professional historians, no matter they're in the West or in China, everyone say this is not gonna be true. And then Mr. Menzies sent this map he purchased from a Chinese antique market to a lab in New Zealand, I believe, to use a carbon-14 technology to date the map. And it turned out that the lab test result is that this map is from the 14th century. So that makes things even more confusing, because professional historians, when they look at this, they all say this is impossible. This is impossible for Chinese to know not only America, but also to know Antarctica, right? But the lab result says that the map is from the 15th century. So later, a further study has shown that it turned out that this is a very smartly faked map, because the fakers, they used the real paper from the 15th century, but they used modern ink to fake this piece, this map. And Mr. Menzies just purchased this map, and he believed that really the Chinese discovered America. So this is there are a lot of problems with this map. Years ago, I remember I watched this documentary movie from the History Channel, and many China historians are interviewed in the documentary, and all of them are questioning the authenticity of this map. For example, a lot of place names used in this map are modern place names. They couldn't have been used in the Ming Dynasty. So that's a linguistic sort of a criticism of this map. Another story about Zheng He is that when Chinese government sort of is initiating the One Road, One Belt project, they try to fund these countries that Zheng He visited and welcome them to study Chinese culture and Chinese language in China. And then a couple of years ago, I believe it was 2005, a Kenyan girl sent a letter to Chinese embassy in Kenya, in East Africa. And she claims that she is a descendant of a Zheng He's seaman who had a shipwreck or accident in Kenya. He says, hundreds of years ago, my ancestors, they're from China. They had this accident in Kenya. They lost their ship, so hundreds of them just settled in Kenya. and they settled there. They maintain their Chinese tradition. Their skin color is pale, lighter, and the traditions and customs are different from other local people. And I am a descendant of those Chinese who arrived in Kenya. And I'm a descendant of a Zheng He's seaman. But if you look at this girl, she looks purely just like a Kenyan African girl. So there is no biological traits that shows that she's a Chinese, but she constantly writes to Chinese embassy year after year, okay, until one day he received a scholarship from Chinese government saying, okay, we believe your story. Here's the money. You're welcome to study Chinese language and culture to China. So she got a 4-year scholarship of going to China, all paid by the Chinese government. So there's a funny story about the legacy of Zheng He's voyages in 21st century. All right, so now let's have a break, and then we will meet again at say 6:05. All right, I will see you at 6:05.